The woman in the powder blue BMW pointed at my barn with one manicured finger and told the county inspector it was a crumbling eyesore that violated 12 different codes and needed to be condemned immediately. I was standing 15 feet away, holding a bucket of wood oil and a brush I'd been using to preserve the hand-hewn beams my great-grandfather had shaped in 1889. The inspector looked at me, then at her, then down at his clipboard with an expression that said he'd rather be literally anywhere else. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice level, "that barn is a registered state historic landmark as of last month. You're asking him to demolish protected property." Her smile could have frozen kerosene. "We'll see about that. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Thomas Eugene Mercer. I'm 57 years old, and I've lived on this land in Limestone County, Kentucky my entire life. The Mercer farm has been in my family since 1883, 142 acres of rolling pasture, tobacco allotments we don't plant anymore, and that barn she wanted destroyed. My grandfather raised dairy cattle here. My father grew burley tobacco and raised me to respect the work and the land that feeds you. I've been a working farrier for 34 years, shoeing horses for every stable, farm, and polo club within 60 miles. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought new meant better than history? The barn is a post and beam structure, white oak throughout, with mortise and tenon joints held together by wooden pegs my great-grandfather carved by hand. No nails in the original frame, just craftsmanship and geometry. It's 52 feet long, 38 wide, with a stone foundation and a standing seam metal roof I replaced in 2009. Inside, there are still chalk marks on the beams where he measured. The hayloft has wide plank flooring, heart pine that's harder now than when it was cut. I use it for my farrier shop, my anvil, my forge, my tools organized on walls my grandfather whitewashed in 1952. It's not abandoned. It's not crumbling. It's maintained, functional, and irreplaceable. 15 years ago, this was all farmland. Then developers bought the Morrison property to our east and built Sycamore Glen. 83 houses on quarter-acre lots, starting at $500,000. The HOA incorporated in 2011. For years, we coexisted fine. I'm outside their boundaries. My property line is 50 yards from the nearest Sycamore Glen lot, but I waved to new neighbors, helped jumpstart cars in winter, didn't complain when their landscaping crews started at 7 a.m. on Saturdays. The trouble started when Brielle Ashworth bought the corner lot closest to my fence line. She moved from Lexington last April, drove that powder blue BMW X5, wore white jeans that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. She worked in luxury real estate consultation, whatever that meant. Her house had a turret, an actual turret, like she was expecting a siege. First week she lived there, she knocked on my door at 8 p.m. I answered in my work clothes, boots, jeans with leather patches, shirt that smelled like horse and coal smoke from the forge. "I'm Brielle, your new neighbor." She smiled with lots of teeth. I wanted to introduce myself and also mention that there's a really distressed-looking barn visible from my backyard. I wasn't sure if you knew it was there. I blinked. "I know. I own it." Her smile tightened. "Oh, well, it's quite an eyesore. Very rustic. I'm sure you've thought about replacing it with something more contemporary? It's 135 years old. I'm not replacing it." "Right. But property values. Surely you understand how a structure like that affects the whole neighborhood's appeal?" "It's not in your neighborhood. It's on my farm." She left, but her smile stayed sharp. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the Sycamore Glen HOA. Brielle had been elected to the Architectural Review Committee. The letter informed me that while my property wasn't technically within HOA boundaries, visual continuity standards applied to structures visible from community lots, and my barn was aesthetically incompatible with community standards. They wanted me to paint it, or screen it with landscaping, or, preferably, remove it. I called the HOA president, a retired dentist named Carl Hoffman who'd always been reasonable. He sighed like a man with a headache. "Tom, I'm sorry. Brielle's been making noise since she moved in. She's got 2 other board members convinced that property values are at stake." "Carl, that barn's been there since before your grandparents were born." "I know. Just maybe plant some trees? Keep the peace." I planted 6 river birches along the fence line, fast-growing, dense canopy. Cost me $800 I didn't budget for. Brielle called it insufficient screening and demanded I install an 8-foot privacy fence at my expense. That's when I started making phone calls. My cousin Rachel works for the Kentucky Heritage Council. Over bourbon and barbecue at my kitchen table, I showed her photos of the barn, the beams, the original construction. She got quiet in that way people do when they see something that matters. Tom, this should be documented. Structures like this are disappearing. If you're interested, I can start the landmark application process. What does that involve? Historical survey, architectural assessment, documentation. If it qualifies, it gets listed on the state register. Legal protection, tax benefits, grants for preservation. Do it. The application took 4 months. A surveyor came out, photographed every joint and beam. An architectural historian spent 6 hours measuring, sketching, taking samples of the wood and stone. They found my great-grandfather's initials carved inside the northwest corner post. EJM, 1889. The approval letter arrived March 18th on state letterhead, signed by the Heritage Council director. The Mercer barn was now a registered Kentucky historic landmark, protected under state preservation law. I had the certificate framed, hung it in my shop, right next to my farrier certification and a photo of my father standing in front of those same doors in 1968. I didn't tell Brielle. Didn't see the point. Then she reported me to the county. The county inspector's name was Dale Rifkin, a thin man in his 40s with a clipboard and a permanent expression of exhausted patience. Brielle stood beside her BMW in white capri pants and sunglasses that cost more than my anvil, arms crossed, radiating triumph. As you can see, she said, gesturing at my barn like it was a crime scene, the structure is clearly deteriorating. The wood is rotting, the roof is unstable, and I have documented evidence. She produced a folder of code violations including unpermitted modifications, unsafe electrical, and inadequate foundation maintenance. Dale looked at the barn, looked at me. Mr. Mercer, you want to respond? I held up my phone, showing the digital copy of the landmark certificate. It's a state historic landmark as of March 18th. Everything she's describing is either false or irrelevant. Brielle's face went from smug to confused. That's impossible. I researched. The approval was issued 5 weeks ago. The barn is legally protected. Any modifications require Heritage Council approval, and the structure's been inspected and certified as historically significant and structurally sound. Dale scrolled through something on his tablet, clicked his thumb. Yeah, I've got it here. Registered March 18th, Mercer Barn, circa 1889, post and beam agricultural structure. Mr. Mercer, I'll need to do a walkthrough for the complaint file, but if the landmark certification's valid, this is pretty much done. Walkthrough is fine. I let him inside. He took photos, checked the beams, ran his hands over the joints. His expression shifted from bureaucratic neutrality to something like reverence. My grandfather had a barn like this in Estill County, he said quietly. Tornado took it in '98. I helped him try to save it. Couldn't. He looked up at the ceiling beams. This is beautiful work. Thank you. Outside, Brielle was on her phone, pacing, her voice rising. Dale wrote something on his clipboard, handed me a copy. Complaints closed. Structures code compliant and protected. You're good. He left. Brielle didn't. This isn't over, she said, her voice tight. That barn is a blight on this community. I don't care what piece of paper you waved around. The HOA has standards, and the HOA has no authority over my property. We have lawyers. So does the state of Kentucky. She got in her BMW and left, tires spitting gravel. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. 3 days later, I found surveyor stakes planted along my fence line. A dozen orange-top stakes marking a boundary 15 feet inside my property. I called Carl Hoffman. Carl, what the hell is this? Tom, I just found out myself. Brielle ordered a boundary survey. She claims the property line was incorrectly recorded and your barn is actually encroaching on HOA land. That's insane. My deed's from 1883. The HOA didn't exist until 2011. I know. I told her that. She's hired a surveyor and a lawyer. She's claiming adverse possession or some damn thing. I hired my own surveyor, a man named Bill Combs who'd been mapping land in Limestone County for 30 years. He came out with a theodolite, a metal detector, and a stack of plat maps going back to 1876. We found the original property markers, iron stakes driven deep, exactly where they'd always been. Bill checked them against the county records, the state survey, and 3 separate historical maps. Tom, your line's perfect. Hasn't moved an inch. Whoever she hired is either incompetent or lying. Can you document that? Already am. Brielle's surveyor filed a report claiming the boundary was ambiguous and needed adjudication. My surveyor filed a report with photographs, GPS coordinates, and historical documentation proving she was wrong. The county clerk kicked it back, told her to hire a competent professional. That's when she escalated. The Sycamore Glen HOA filed a lawsuit, not against me personally, but against the occupant of the property adjacent to Lot 47, seeking declaratory judgment on the boundary line and an injunction to halt unpermitted commercial activity on disputed land. My farrier work. She was calling my work unpermitted commercial activity. I called a lawyer, a woman named Sandra Petrie who had handled my father's estate in my divorce. She read the lawsuit, read the surveyor reports, and laughed. Not a happy laugh, a dark one. Tom, this is harassment. They don't have a case. But it'll cost you $10,000 to defend, minimum. Do it. There might be another way. She made 3 phone calls. One to the Heritage Council, one to the county attorney, one to a journalist at the Lexington Herald-Leader who specialized in land use stories. The Heritage Council sent a formal letter to the HOA, pointing out that any legal action affecting a registered landmark required state notification and could trigger sanctions under preservation law. The county attorney sent a letter noting that frivolous boundary disputes wasted county resources and could result in penalties. The journalist wrote an article, HOA targets historic barn and property dispute. It ran with a photo of my barn, golden and evening light, and quoted the Heritage Council director calling it an irreplaceable example of 19th century agricultural architecture. The article went regional. Then it hit social media. Suddenly, Brielle Ashworth and Sycamore Glen HOA were the villains in a story about protecting history from suburban sprawl. The HOA's Facebook page got flooded with angry comments. Someone started a petition. Carl Hoffman called me on a Tuesday night, his voice exhausted. Tom, the board's voting to drop the lawsuit. Brielle's furious, but we can't afford this. We're hemorrhaging goodwill, and our insurance won't cover it. Good. She's talking about escalating. Be careful. I didn't know what that meant until I smelled smoke. The fire started at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in June. I woke to my dog barking, looked out the window, and saw orange light flickering inside the barn. I was outside in my boots and boxers in 30 seconds, phone in hand, already dialing 911. The fire was in the southeast corner, near where I store hay and leather scraps. Easy fuel. I grabbed the extinguisher from my truck, sprayed it into the flames, bought myself 2 minutes before it ran empty. The volunteer fire department arrived 8 minutes later. They had it out in 20, but the damage was done. Part of the wall was scorched black, the stone foundation cracked from the heat, and the smell of burnt wood and chemicals hung thick in the air. The fire marshal showed up at dawn. His name was Pete Garrett, a solid man with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He walked the burn site, took samples, photographed everything. Accelerant, he said, holding up a piece of charred fabric. Gasoline-soaked rag, stuffed under the wall. This was arson. My chest went cold. You're sure? Positive. You got enemies. I told him about Brielle, about the lawsuit, the boundary dispute, the code complaints. He wrote it all down, his expression darkening. I'll refer this to the sheriff. You might want to check if you've got any security footage in the area. I didn't, but my neighbor 2 lots down, a retired engineer named Paul Voss, had installed cameras after someone stole his lawnmower. I walked over after the fire trucks left, still smelling like smoke. Paul pulled up his footage. At 2:34 a.m., a powder blue BMW X5 drove slowly past his house, toward my property, no headlights. It came back 14 minutes later, moving faster. Paul burned the footage to a USB drive. I handed it to the sheriff's deputy, who came out that afternoon. Deputy Harris watched it twice, then looked at me. You know who drives this vehicle? Brielle Ashworth. Lives in Sycamore Glen, Lot 47. She have a reason to burn your barn? About 12 of them. They arrested her 3 days later. The fire marshal's report, the security footage, and her own cell phone GPS data put her at my property at the time of the fire. They found a receipt in her car for a gas can purchased the day before. She denied everything. Said she was out driving because she couldn't sleep. Said the footage was inconclusive. Said I was framing her. The county prosecutor charged her with second-degree arson, a Class B felony. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, but the Heritage Council got involved. Arson of a state landmark carried enhanced penalties and potential federal charges. Brielle took a plea deal in September. 5 years in prison, suspended to 18 months if she completed probation, full restitution for damages, and a permanent restraining order keeping her 500 yards from my property. She and her husband sold the house in October and moved back to Lexington. I heard she lost her real estate license. The turret house sold for $60,000 less than they paid. The barn repairs took 4 months and cost $43,000. The Heritage Council provided a grant covering $22,000. A preservation carpenter from Berea donated his labor. We replaced the damaged section with reclaimed white oak from a barn in Boyle County. Massed the joinery. Kept everything historically accurate. The fire marshal said if the fire had spread another 3 feet, the whole structure would have been lost. But it didn't. The hand-hewn beams my great-grandfather shaped held firm. The Sycamore Glen HOA sent a formal apology letter, signed by Carl and the entire board. They planted a commemorative tree on the community green with a plaque, in appreciation of the Mercer barn, a historic treasure. I didn't frame that letter, but I kept it. Last month, the Heritage Council held a ceremony at the barn, celebrating its restoration and officially dedicating it as a preservation education site. 40 people came, historians, neighbors, students from the university. They gave me a second plaque, Thomas E. Mercer, Steward of History. I hung it next to the first one, and next to my father's photo, and next to the chalk marks my great-grandfather left on the beams in 1889. People ask me if I'm angry. If I hate Brielle for what she tried to destroy. I don't have room for hate. Hate's a weed, and I've got better things to tend. What I have is a barn that stood for 135 years, built by a man who understood that good work outlasts the people who do it. I've got beams joined without nails, foundations laid by hand, and a roof that's kept tools and animals and history dry through a century of storms. I've got neighbors who showed up when it mattered. I've got a state that recognized what's worth saving. And I've got work to do, horses to shoe, metal to forge, and a structure to maintain so my grandkids can stand here someday and touch the same wood their great-great-great-grandfather shaped. Brielle wanted something new and clean and suburban perfect. She couldn't see that what she was trying to erase was worth more than anything she'd ever own. Some people measure value in dollars and curb appeal. I measure it in years, in craftsmanship, in the weight of history under your hands. I'm Thomas Eugene Mercer. I'm 57 years old. I've been a farrier for 34 years, and I'm the 5th generation to work this land. And every morning, when I walk into that barn and smell the wood oil and old hay and coal smoke, I say a silent thank you to the man who built it and the laws that protected it. Because some things are worth fighting for. And some things, if you build them right, are strong enough to fight for themselves.